Hello everyone, it's Smarty Pants Chess here, and today I'm going to cover a game between two absolute magicians of the game, Rashid Nezhmetdinov and Mikhail Tal. And this game is played in the USSR Championships in 1961 in Baku. So in this game we'll just get straight into it. Nezhmetdinov is white and Tal is black. Nezhmetdinov opened with e4, Tal played c5, the Sicilian, knight to f3 was played, and then d6, d4, black takes on d4, white recaptures. Tal played knight to f6 to attack e4, white defends with knight to c3, e6 is played and then bishop to e2. Tal plays a6, white castles, and then Tal plays queen c7. Nezhmetdinov now plays f4, trying to keep control over this e5 square and gain some space on the king side. And Tal plays knight b to d7 to gain some control over the e5 square. And now Nezhmetdinov plays a very attacking and aggressive move, g4, so preparing g5 and trying to kick the knight away on f6. Nezhmetdinov's also controlling a lot of squares with this pawn wall, so trying to control all these centre squares and push the knight off f6, that's also controlling a lot of squares for black. But Tal isn't known to sit back, he plays b5, so preparing the move b4 to kick the knight on c3. Now it's perfectly possible for Nezhmetdinov here to play g5, but actually in his notes he thought that after b4, g takes f6 and b takes c3, this actually favours black, and it definitely does, and the computer evaluation supports this. This is just due to the fact that after, let's say, f takes g7, there'll be bishop takes g7, let's say b takes c3 for instance, and you have to say white's structure is a bit of a mess. So going back to the game, after b5, Nezhmetdinov played a defensive move, a3, stopping b4, which makes perfect sense. Tal plays bishop to b7, striking out at the e4 pawn, so now two pieces are attacking this pawn, and Nezhmetdinov defends with bishop to f3, so now has the knight on c3 and the bishop defending that pawn. Now here is the key moment for black. Tal could have played many moves here. e5 was one of them, but then Nezhmetdinov writes in his notes that after knight d to e2 and knight c5, knight g3 and e takes f4, bishop takes f4, knight f to d7 and knight to f5, followed by knight to e5 and knight to e3, Nezhmetdinov thinks that after a fight in the centre ensues, black has been fighting for control of the key squares, but still has his king in the centre. So this, he believes, definitely favours white. In this variation after knight fd7, white could play knight d5, bishop takes d5 and e takes d5. This is even better for white because now white can play moves like a4 and rook to e1 with check. If we go back to the game position, we just realised that e5 isn't very good for black, but actually the move h6 is probably the best move here. And this is probably what Tal should have played. If white goes queen e2, then actually black can now become really aggressive. And I think this is very Tal-esque because after g5, takes, bishop takes and bishop to e7, I can imagine Tal actually playing this game. So the point is that now after bishop to e7, there's ideas of this good attack against this bishop on g5. If white retreats with bishop to e3, black can play moves like knight h7, and the plan is very simple for black. They've sacked a pawn, they're going to castle queenside, and then get this rook going down this board, and I think this would suit Tal right to the ground. So I'm surprised he didn't play h6 in this position. So back to the game, Tal actually played knight to c5. So again, three pieces now attacking this e4 pawn. Nezhmetdinov defends with queen to e2. And now Tal struck in the centre with e5. d5 was also a possible move here, but I think e takes d5, black can castle, but now white can hit out with a move like b4, and this is really good for white, because after knight d7, white can sack a piece, takes on b5, a takes b5, knight takes b5, hitting the queen. If the queen goes to b8, this is game over for black, because after d takes e6, f takes e6, there's queen c4 with check, and after blocking, white can just play b takes c5. White's regained all their material and has a great attack coming. In this variation, after knight takes b5, bishop to a6 is considered the best move. Again, white can still win with d takes e6, bishop takes b5, queen takes b5, and if queen b6 to swap queens, there's just e takes f7, And I've highlighted all the extra pawns that white has in green. So white has an extra 5 pawns as opposed to a knight or a 3-point piece. So again, white is definitely winning this position, has the 2 bishops, should be able to convert this. So going back to the game, that's probably why Tal didn't play d5. So he did play e5 though, hitting out in the centre, attacking the knights on d4, and Nezhmetdinov jumped his knight in to f5. Now g6 was played by Tal, hitting out at the knight. Again, an alternative was knight f to d7, but Nezhmetdinov writes knight d5, he considered a good move, bishop takes, e takes, and white now has a great advantage. So going back to the game, Tal did indeed play g6, Nezhmetdinov took on e5, and then recaptured on e5 with the d-pawn. If black takes on f5 here, then white can continue with e takes f6, and after takes on e4, takes on e4, takes again, bishop takes and castles, white has a better advantage with a move like bishop to f4. White will be a whole pawn up, and has moves like bishop to f5 coming with check, so this would be very advantageous for white. So Tal didn't take on f5 though, he played d takes e5. And now I ask you the question, what would you play in this position? Because Nezhmetdinov came up with a very inventive move. He played the move knight to h6. The point is that this knight now hits out at this f7 pawn, and if white can now use this powerful rook, maybe manoeuvre the bishop out the way, they're going to have a very good game. I'll just quickly say, if you chose a move like bishop to g5 here, Nezhmetdinov actually hated this move because after, let's say, queen to b6 here, knight to e3, white's attack is pretty much just over, and black is definitely in this game now. So in the game, after knight to h6, Tal played knight to e6, and then Nezhmetdinov played bishop to g2, using the rook on the open file, attacking this f6 knight. And now bishop to g7 was played to defend the knight. Again, knight to f4 was an alternate option here, but I think after bishop takes f4, e takes f4, and then e5, Nezhmetdinov actually thinks this position is winning for white. This is because after, let's say, bishop takes h6, white can play e takes f6 with check. If king f8, there's queen e7 check, and if a trade of queens occurs, f takes e7, king takes e7, then bishop takes b7 just finishes the job for white. Also, if knight to d7 here, then white can play e6, a very nice move, because after bishop takes h6, there's e takes d7 with check. If king f8, again we can go bishop takes b7, queen takes b7 and finish with queen to e5, attacking the rook. And after rook g8, there's g5. And now white is threatening to play moves like queen to d6 if the bishop retreats to g7. So this is an easy win for white. However, I should note that after this e5 move in this variation, Nezhmetdinov actually missed a drawing move for black. Black could have played knight to d5. This is because after takes, black can play queen c5 with check and win the piece back. So after rook f2, queen takes d5. This is considered an equal position. And note that the black bishop is still attacking the knight on h6, so white would definitely hate this position. So maybe knight to f4 was possible for Tal to play. Instead he played bishop g7 though, defending the f6 knight. But now Nezhmetdinov goes in for a rook sack. Rook takes f6. And after bishop takes f6, uses his knight to his advantage with knight to d5, attacking the queen on c7 and the bishop on f6. If black takes this bishop off, then white can continue with e takes d6. If knight to d4, play queen f2, attacking the bishop again on f6. Black can defend with queen to b6, but now maybe white should play bishop to e3 and just pin that knight on d4, and still preparing move c3, and the knight on h6 and the queen on f2 are still attacking this f7 pawn inadvertently. In his notes, Nezhmetdinov also considered g5 as a good move, because after knight to e2 check, king f1, takes, knight takes c1, g takes f6, Nezhmetdinov considered that white still has sufficient material to win this game, and that's true because black's knight is trapped on c1 and white should have 2 pieces for the rook. So if we just go back to this position where white just played knight to d5, Tal didn't take the knight, he actually played queen to d8, so defends the bishop and moves the queen away. Nezhmetdinov continued though, queen f2, attacking the bishop on f6 again. Again, if black takes this knight off, then e takes d5, knight to f4, takes, queen takes f4. If queen b6, white can play king h1. And if black castles queenside, then knight takes f7 is actually fine for white. It forks the two rooks. If bishop takes b2, white should play rook to f1. And if rook h to f8, d6 is just good for white. So white's still the exchange down, but has a much better position and more dynamic pieces. Tal didn't play bishop takes d5 though, he actually played knight to f4. Nezhmetdinov took this knight off, bishop takes. Tal recaptured, and now white's got a choice to make. Queen takes f4 was a possible move. Black could continue bishop to d4 check. If king h1, take on d5, e takes d5 and queen f6. But however, white has now a bit of an advantage. He can play queen e4. And if queen e5, there's rook e1. If f6 to support the queen, white should play the move d6. So white's now attacking this rook on a8. If rook c8 to move the rook away, there's rook d1, threatening to play rook takes d4. So if the queen trade occurs, queen takes e4, bishop takes e4. The rook on d1 is now attacking the bishop. So if the bishop takes on b2, there's d7 with check, king e7, d takes c8, queen, rook takes, and then king to g2. And white is now material up. So advantage white in this endgame. So Nezhmetdinov didn't actually play queen takes f4 though. He played e5. And I think this is actually a better move. So in the game Tal took this pawn off, but actually bishop h4 was actually a better move that Tal could have played. Nezhmetdinov should continue with queen to d4, attacking the rook. If rook f8, then white can play rook to d1. If rook c8, there's c3. If bishop takes d5, bishop takes d5, queen c7, and white can play knight takes f7. And if takes on f7, bishop takes, king takes, and queen takes f4. After king g8, this is a long variation, but white can play g5, but we actually get into a drawish position with queen c4. If rook to d4 to block the queen, there's queen e2, queen takes. But after queen e3 and then blocking it, queen takes g5 and then takes on e5. Again, we're into a very even endgame with both sides having 4 pawns and a rook and a queen each. So this is probably a drawn position. So if we just go back where Nezhmetdinov just played e5, Tal should have probably played bishop h4 here. And this is probably what could have saved him. But in the game, Tal took on e5 with the bishop. And Nezhmetdinov loves these type of positions, just eats them up for breakfast. He plays rook to e1, so pins the bishop on e5. And again, Tal has some options. Bishop takes d5 was one of them. But then white can play rook takes, and if bishop to e6, just play bishop c6. If king f8, there's bishop takes a8. And again, white has a good advantage here. In the game though, Tal played f6, protecting the bishop on e5 with the pawn. But now Nezhmetdinov comes up with an ingenious move. Knight takes f6 with check. This unleashes the bishop on g2. The rook on the e-file is unleashed, and the queen is coming into the fray as well. Queen takes f6 was played by Tal. But now Nezhmetdinov finishes the game off. Queen to d4. Doubly attacks this bishop on e5 and there's no way to defend it. Tal sidesteps with king to f8. And now Nezhmetdinov plays rook takes e5. And rook takes e5 actually threatens a discovered attack with rook to e8. For instance, let's say black just played a nothing move like a5. White could play rook to e8 with check. If the king took it, then queen takes queen. And if the king goes to, let's say, g7, there's moves like maybe rook to e7 with check. And of course the queen can't take this because it's pinned. And black will be forced to lose the queen. So after rook takes e5, queen d8 was played by Tal. And now Nezhmetdinov played another great move, rook to f5 check. Tal took this rook off, but now the point is that that was a discovered attack again once again. Queen takes h8 with check. King e7 was played, and now queen to g7. King e6 was played by Tal, and now g takes f5 with check. And here actually Tal resigned the game. So why did he resign? Well, because king d6 is forced, White should then play knight to f7 with check. That's a fork against the king and queen. After king c5, there's knight takes d8, and white's just won a queen and will probably win the bishop on the next move. And that was an absolutely stunning and beautiful game from the two magicians, and this game was actually awarded a special prize for best in the tournament. So it goes without saying that Nezhmetdinov is an absolute genius of the game, and I hope to cover many more of his games in the next few videos. My old chess coach did actually say if you're ever feeling uninspired with chess, just pick out a Nezhmetdinov game and you'll soon become inspired again. Anyway, this has been Smarty Pants Chess. I hope you liked the video. If you did, please support the channel by liking, comment or subscribing to it, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Bye for now.